Chapter 6 Nightmover. In May 1993, the FBI opened the case on Aldrich Ames. Headquarters assigned the investigation to Robert Bear Bryant, a lawyer from Little Rock, Arkansas, who was head of the Washington field office. Bryant, in turn, handed the day-to-day supervision of the case to John Lewis, an ex-Marine and counterintelligence agent for 22 years, who was second in command of the field office. With the collapse of the Soviet Union 2 years earlier, the KGB's foreign intelligence arm had changed its name to the SVR. It made little difference in its operations, and Lewis knew its methods well. He had started working KGB cases in 1976 at headquarters, later for 2 years as counterintelligence director in the White House, and then to Vienna for the FBI on detail to the CIA. Lewis made a key and inspired decision. To run the Ames investigation, he chose Special Agent Leslie G. Weiser, Jr., 38, a former Navy lawyer from Level Green, Pennsylvania, a Pittsburgh suburb. He had been both a military defense counsel and a prosecutor while stationed at the Navy's submarine base at New London, Connecticut. Weiser joined the FBI in 1983 when he left the Navy. He worked in foreign counterintelligence for 7 years. Tall and lanky, with gray hair and a matching mustache, Weiser did not fit the stereotype of the laconic, grim-faced FBI agent familiar from movies and television. He smiled a lot and could laugh at himself. But he was also exceptionally quick and decisive, a consummate counterspy. Weiser led a squad of 7 special agents, plus 2 wiremen in charge of electronic surveillance, 2 agents in charge of physical surveillance, and an evidence specialist. The investigation was closely held, and members of the squad were carefully scrutinized before they were assigned. We polygraphed all our own people before they got involved in this case, John Lewis said. We didn't want any leaks from the Bureau. Weiser was also concerned about leaks. At the FBI field office, then located at Buzzards Point, a remote industrial area on the Anacostia River in southwest Washington, the operation was tightly held. It was very secret, Weiser said. People in the next room did not know what we were doing. When they asked, we said we were working on the X-Files, a popular TV program. We joked, and then they stopped asking. The FBI gave Ames and the case the code name Nightmover. Weiser's first task was to place Ames under surveillance. To do so, Weiser called in the Gs, FBI parlance for the SSG, the Special Surveillance Group. The Gs are a surveillance team selected to look like ordinary citizens. Bearded bikers, white-haired grannies with shopping bags, a young mother with a baby in a stroller, college students out jogging, street repair crews in yellow hard hats, young lovers kissing in the park, all might be Gs on the job. The Gs are civil servants, not FBI agents, and earn lower pay than the agents. All are trained in surveillance, photography, and communications. They are chosen precisely because they do not resemble the public's concept of FBI agents. About 50 members of the SSG were assigned to the Ames case under Weiser. John Lewis recalled some of the problems Weiser faced. It was tough to set up surveillance in a residential neighborhood where Ames lived, Lewis said. Strangers are noticed. We told the Gs, cover him like a glove, but don't get made. If there is a remote chance he will identify you, abort. More than once our people were spotted. There was a report to the police about strangers in the neighborhood, but we didn't want to go to the local police. All the while, Ames was leaving signals for the SVR, filling dead drops, hiding places, with more secrets, and picking up cash. But the FBI, to avoid alerting Ames, kept its distance. The fact that Ames was trained in counter-surveillance made it more difficult for the agents to catch him in the act of filling or clearing a drop. In addition to the Gs watching Ames, his home telephones were tapped with approval from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. the shadowy, secretive wiretap court in the Capitol. The FBI wanted to place a James Bond-type transmitter in the Jaguar so that Ames could be tracked, but the problem was how to gain access to his car. Weiser had a plan. Ames was now working in the CIA's Counter-Narcotics Center. Weiser invited him and his boss, David Edgar, to a meeting at FBI headquarters, supposedly to discuss a project Ames was working on to develop cooperation among countries in the Black Sea area to curtail the opium crop. But Weiser had to be sure that Ames drove his own car to FBI headquarters. Edgar was in on the scheme and said to Ames, "I can't use my car, it's being repaired. We'll have to use yours." So Ames drove his Jaguar into FBI headquarters and parked next to the cobblestoned courtyard in the center of the building. He took an elevator upstairs to the meeting. As soon as the doors to the elevator closed, an FBI agent drove the car into the FBI garage, using a set of keys he had made a few days earlier. The meeting lasted half a day, ample time to install the beacon in the car. Then the Jaguar was returned where Ames had left it. In August, Les Weiser ordered a trash cover on Ames's house in Arlington, Virginia. FBI jargon for going through a suspect's garbage. He did not need approval from the Attorney General or the Special Surveillance Court because once a person puts trash out on a public street for pickup, it is fair game. But how to get at the trash without Ames suspecting anything? John Lewis recalled the difficulties. "We discovered he was a restless sleeper. He would get up at 2 or 3 in the morning and look out in the street." Weiser devised a plan and turned to the G's Special Search and Response Team. The FBI obtained a trash barrel on wheels identical to all the others provided to homeowners in the area. The barrel would be placed in a van. As the van reached the Ames house in the dead of night, 2 men would jump out and switch barrels. Weiser had the team perform practice drills until he was satisfied that the switch could be done in seconds, noiselessly. The trash would then be taken to a location nearby, examined, and anything of interest removed. Then Weiser discovered a potential flaw in the plan. Arlington trash cans had individual serial numbers. Ames might notice if his trash barrel had suddenly changed numbers during the night. Ames's trash can would have to be returned to his house well before dawn. But only a few weeks later, Bryant told Weiser to call off the trash brigade. There was concern his antenna might be up, Weiser recalled. Weiser had no choice. He brought the nocturnal trash operation to a halt. On September 9th, Ames left his house unusually early, just after 6 a.m. Through a mix-up, the G's arrived half an hour late and missed him. Then at 4 p.m., Ames left the CIA early. The FBI surveillance cars were waiting outside the gates at Langley. Ames, in his red Jaguar, zoomed onto the George Washington Parkway. "Ames just takes off like a bat out of hell," Bear Bryant recalled. "And we lose him." Although the FBI had planted the beacon in Ames's Jaguar, its signals could only be picked up if the Bureau's trailing car was reasonably close behind. And the beacon was not as powerful as the FBI had hoped. Weiser was getting considerable heat from the FBI brass. They were distressed that Ames had gone operational and eluded surveillance twice in a single day. Weiser decided to reinstitute the trash cover, despite Bryant's order to stop it. "I took the view that he had merely suspended the trash cover," Weiser said, "so I unsuspended it. It was a gamble, and might endanger his career because if he came up empty-handed again, with nothing but banana peels and coffee grounds, Bryant might not appreciate Weiser's interpretation of his orders." Weiser decided to wait until Ames left for Ankara on a trip for the Counter-Narcotics Center on Monday, September 13th. 2 days later, in the pre-dawn hours of September 15th, a black van, its lights off, glided slowly past Ames's house. Just as they had practiced in their trash drills, 2 men jumped out and silently switched the barrels. The van moved on. Moments later, the FBI got its first major break in the case. They removed from Ames's trash a torn yellow Post-it note. It said, "I am ready to meet at B on 1 October. I cannot read north 13 to 19 September. If you will meet at B 1 October, please signal north week of 20 September to confirm. No message at pipe. If you cannot meet 1 October, signal north after 27 September with message at pipe." Translated, the note, which the FBI laboratory determined was in Ames's handwriting, meant that he was ready to meet the SVR in Bogota on October 1st, but would be unable to read signal site north during the middle of September. The reason was that Ames would be attending the counter-narcotics meeting in Turkey that week. He asked that the Russians confirm the Bogota date by leaving a signal at north, a telephone pole near Ames's house, after he returned from Turkey, or by leaving a message in pipe, a dead drop in a drain pipe in Wheaton Regional Park in Maryland, if the Bogota meeting was canceled. The FBI concluded that the note it had recovered from the trash was a first draft, because it also found a small piece of a second draft. Ames had put the final version in a dead drop on the afternoon of September 9th, when he went racing out of Langley, eluding the FBI. When the Post-it note was found by the trash team, Weiser was called at his home before dawn. He showered, shaved, and got into the office a little before 6 a.m. He was elated when he read the note. This was it. "When we got this, we knew we had a spy," Weiser said, "and that he was active." Weiser was waiting outside Bryant's office, smiling broadly when his boss arrived. "Weiser looked like the Halloween pumpkin," Bryant said. "I mean, he was so happy it was unbelievable." Weiser savored the moment. "I walked in and said, 'We've solved it.' I showed him the note. He asked me where I got it, so I told him, and there was a little discussion about it. Bryant, after all, had ordered Weiser to halt the trash cover." All was quickly forgiven. "It was," said Bryant, "a marvelous piece of insubordination." In October, with court approval, FBI agents secretly entered Ames's home and planted bugs. His telephones had been tapped for 4 months, but only heard phone conversations. Now, tiny transmitters were hidden throughout the house to listen to voice conversations. The agents also downloaded his computer. They found CIA files and messages to the SVR. R. James Woolsey, the CIA director, notified the White House that a spy had been found inside the agency. President Clinton's national security advisor, Anthony Lake, told the president the bad news. The wiretaps made clear that Rosario Ames was well aware of his spying, and even advised and nagged him about his tradecraft. More than once, she complained and worried that his espionage was sloppy. On a trip to Bogota, when he lost a suitcase containing cash the Russians had paid him, she advised him, "Perhaps you should use a carry-on." He said he would next time. Ames, meanwhile, appeared blissfully unaware that his spying had been detected. He sent a message to the SVR assuring the Russian service, "All is well with me. I have no indication that anything is wrong or suspected." On February 22, 1994, Ames was scheduled to travel to Moscow to confer with officials on counter-narcotics. He would be on the home turf of the SVR, the very intelligence service that had paid him millions of dollars over 9 years. The FBI did not think that was a very good idea. If Ames had picked up any whiff of trouble, he might not bother to come back. The trip was delayed 3 times. FBI officials and prosecutors met with John Lewis and Paul Redmond, a top CIA counterintelligence official. Lewis was adamant that Ames could not be allowed to get on the plane to Moscow. Redmond agreed. Once the decision was made, Ames had to be arrested before he left. On February 21st, Weiser and an assistant U.S. attorney presented an arrest warrant to a U.S. magistrate in Virginia. David Edgar called Ames at home and summoned him to the office. Ames did not expect to be there long. He had to get back and finish packing. 9 miles away in Alexandria, Weiser pulled away from the federal courthouse in an FBI radio car. "We got the warrant," he said. Ames stepped into his Jaguar and pulled out of his driveway. A block and a half from his house, he came to a stop sign. The car ahead of him had stopped at the sign, but oddly, it had not started up again. Alongside it was another car apparently waiting to turn left. The street was completely blocked. Ames waited impatiently for the car ahead to move. Suddenly, 2 more cars with flashing red lights appeared behind him. The Jaguar was boxed in. 3 FBI special agents approached the car. One, Del Spry, held out his credentials. "FBI, you're under arrest," he told Ames. "Get out of the car." Ames, in a state of total shock, sat frozen behind the steering wheel. Agent Mike Donner repeated the order. "Get out of the car." "There must be some mistake," Ames said, lapsing into B-movie dialogue. He repeated "there must be some mistake" a few times. Then the door of the Jaguar opened slowly. Ames got out, moving like a man in a slow-motion video. "You're under arrest for violating U.S. espionage statutes," Del Spry said. It was 10:30 a.m. Half a dozen other armed FBI agents surrounded the CIA man. Ames spread his hands wide, a look of incredulity on his face. "Espionage? Me?" he asked. "I hear what you're saying, but you've got to be kidding." As Ames stood against the Jaguar, Del Spry put the handcuffs on behind his back. Ames was placed in one of the FBI cars. He was driven to the FBI's Northern Virginia field office in nearby Tyson's Corner. Les Weiser's car had only gone 50 feet from the courthouse in Alexandria when his radio crackled. "The suspect is secure," a voice informed him. At the same moment, an army of FBI agents had silently surrounded the Ames's $540,000 house on North Randolph Street. Upstairs in the bathroom, Rosario Ames was putting on her makeup. Their 5-year-old son, Paul, was also in the house. Rosario's mother, Cecilia, visiting from Bogota, was asleep in the guest room. The doorbell rang, and the housekeeper answered it. Rosario was surprised. She wasn't expecting anyone. Rosario went downstairs. The visitors, a man and a woman, identified themselves as special agents of the FBI and asked her to step outside. They told her that her husband had just been arrested for espionage, and that she was also under arrest for espionage. They had asked her to step out of the house so that her son would not see her being arrested. They told her she could go back inside and tell her mother and get her coat. Rosario ran upstairs, woke her mother, and told her that she and Rick had been arrested by the FBI. Paul was waiting in the hall when Rosario came back downstairs. She grabbed a camel's hair coat and hugged and kissed her son. "I have to go with these people," she said, "but don't worry, I'll be back soon." Outside, she realized the house was surrounded. There were FBI cars everywhere, and agents with walkie-talkies in the front yard and on the street. She, too, was put in an FBI car. As Weiser approached the Ames's house in Arlington, a second message came over the radio. "Suspect 2 is in custody." In the FBI car taking Ames to the field office, Ames repeated to himself, almost like a mantra, "Think, think, think." In the car, Ames, too, could listen to the FBI's communications. He heard a report come over the radio. "We've secured the house." Ames knew that all kinds of incriminating documents, computer disks, and letters were in the house, and in his computer, containing details of much of his 9 years of spying for the KGB. Now they had him and Rosario and the evidence. It was all over. Slouched in the FBI car, Aldrich Ames, veteran of 31 years in the CIA, secret millionaire, and up to then, Moscow's most valuable mole in the history of the Cold War, uttered only 2 words. Oh, fuck. Many of Ames's victims were the most important ever to spy for U.S. intelligence. Most disquieting of all for the CIA was the betrayal of General Dmitry Fedorovich Polyakov. He was first recruited by the FBI, which gave him the code name Top Hat. He had returned to Moscow in 1980 after spying for the United States for 18 years, and was living out his retirement peacefully with his family. During his long career, he had provided the names of 4 Americans who were spying for the Kremlin, and a mass of critical military information, including data on Soviet strategic missiles. Other than Oleg Penkovsky, whose information helped the U.S. during the Cuban Missile Crisis, Polyakov was considered the most valuable and highest-ranking spy in the agency's history. Because of Ames, he was executed. But there were many other valuable assets, including Adolf Tolkachev, the defense researcher and expert on stealth aircraft technology. Although the majority of the KGB sources Ames gave to the Russians worked for the CIA, 2 had been recruited by the FBI from inside the Russian embassy in Washington. They were Lieutenant Colonel Valery F. Martinov and Major Sergei M. Motorin. That worried Ames because there was always a chance, however remote, they would hear some whisper inside the embassy that would expose his identity. That risk was much too close for comfort, which is why Ames made sure that both their names were on the list he handed to Chuvakin at Chadwick's. "I began to fear the possibility of detection," he said later. "I began to see it as useful or protective of me to compromise those cases, so they wouldn't be in a position to hear something. I didn't assume they would ever become knowledgeable, but accidents happen. Martinov and Motorin could be a potential threat." Those who were serving overseas when Ames betrayed them were lured back to Moscow by various stratagems. Martinov was assigned to escort Yurchenko back to Moscow when the defector changed his mind and went home. Martinov never returned to Washington. Motorin's tour was up normally, so he too went back to Moscow. Both men were executed. Leonid Poleshchuk, a senior KGB counterintelligence officer in Nigeria, was persuaded to return to Moscow with a KGB fiction that a desirable apartment had been found for him. Other victims of Ames were lured home from Indonesia, Portugal, Hungary, and Germany. All were killed. After Ames's arrest, Plato Kacharis, the celebrated Washington defense attorney, was selected as his court-appointed lawyer. Kacharis had a rock-solid reputation for integrity. He also earned hundreds of dollars an hour keeping wealthy clients out of jail. Representing Ames paid $60 an hour. But it was also the sort of high-profile case that lawyers found it hard to resist. The CIA was anxious to question Ames about what exactly he had passed to the Russians. Kacharis was able to work out a plea bargain with prosecutors. If Ames cooperated fully with the CIA and the FBI, he would be sentenced to life, and Rosario to 5 years. At the time, there was no death penalty for espionage. Both pleaded guilty on April 28, 1994. The first debriefing of Ames took place in the FBI's office in Tyson's Corner, the day after the sentencing. Ames revealed how frightened he was when the KGB swiftly rolled up all the people he had betrayed in 1985. He had expected the Soviets would act cautiously and slowly, allowing plenty of time between arrests. That way, he hoped, the CIA would be misled and attribute its losses to various reasons other than the work of a single source who had provided all the names at one time. But the KGB's rapid action was likely to trigger a mole hunt in the CIA that could point to him. When he told the KGB in Rome how scared he was by the precipitous arrests in Moscow, the Soviets had asked, "Is there anyone else we can blame?" The KGB was suggesting, in other words, that Ames frame another CIA officer as the Soviet mole. Ames looked at Jean Vertefeuille, who sat across the table from him. "You're not going to like this," he said, but I gave them your name." It was an electric moment. The debriefers could hardly believe it. Ames had falsely provided the KGB the identity of the CIA's chief mole hunter to try to deflect attention from his own guilt. On June 2nd, I interviewed Ames in the Alexandria City Detention Center. Accompanied by Plato Kacharis, I took the elevator to the third floor and entered a tiny windowless room with bare white cinder block walls, a small round table, and chairs. The heavy door slammed behind me and locked. There was a small round table and chairs. No windows. Opposite the door I had entered was another door, with a small glass panel at chest height, leading to the cell blocks. I waited, and in a few moments I saw him through the glass. A uniformed guard unlocked the door, and Ames entered. The guard left. Ames was wearing a khaki shirt with the word "prisoner" on the back, and dark pants. He was tall, with broad shoulders, a mustache, and thick glasses. We sat down at the little table. Kacharis handed Ames some interview requests and other correspondence that he had brought, and some yellow pads his client had requested. Ames took a moment to shuffle through the papers. Incongruously, he looked for all the world like a business executive opening a meeting. He was friendly at first, upbeat, almost cheerful. It was only a little more than a month since his sentencing, and it was apparent that he had not yet felt the full impact of the bleak future that awaited him. The debriefings had begun, and as he talked it was clear that he was enjoying the interaction with his old colleagues from the CIA and the FBI. They were treating him like a professional, as long as he kept talking and revealing new details of his spying. "The other day they brought in a couple of actual members of the surveillance team," he said. "They were very excited to finally get a chance to meet their target." Ames smiled, as though he savored all this. He had to be careful, he said, not to reveal any classified information to me. Rosario's sentence depended upon his compliance with the plea agreement, which barred him from disclosing more secrets about either the CIA or his spying for the KGB. He expected she would get 5 years, he said. He was very bitter about his wife's sentence because she did nothing. I said I understood he wanted to protect his wife, but the FBI wiretaps were part of the public record, and the excerpts that had been released showed that his wife had coached him to be careful and participated in his activities. His eyes turned to ice. I thought he might break off the interview, but he did not. Shifting to other subjects, I asked him how he had acquired the KGB codename Kolokol, which means bell in Russian. He chose it himself, he said, because it was the name of a weekly journal published by Alexander Herzen, the 19th-century Russian revolutionary writer who was exiled in Paris and later in England. The journal was banned in Russia, but widely read. Ames became quite animated in talking about Herzen and the roots of his KGB codename. The interview was winding down, and Kacharis pushed a buzzer to summon a guard. Early in our conversation, I mentioned that I had met his former boss, Yevgeny Primakov, the head of the SVR, in Moscow a few years earlier, when I was researching an article for the New York Times Magazine. Ames asked me what I thought of Primakov. Ames listened intently. He seemed hungry for news of the SVR. Then the guard arrived. We shook hands, and Ames was taken away. The heavy doors slammed behind him with a loud metallic clang. When the debriefings ended, Ames was transferred to the maximum security wing of the federal prison at Allenwood, Pennsylvania, to begin his life sentence. Rosario Ames, after serving her own prison time, returned to Bogota with their son. And so the spy had been caught, convicted, and sent to prison for life. The drama was over. The problem of the mole inside U.S. intelligence had been solved, or so it seemed. But the counterintelligence establishment within the government knew better. There was a major problem, and his name was Felix Bloch.